just after them, her husband, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who, with his hands between the hands of the Queen, becomes her liege man of life and limb and of earthly worship, in the name of God.
At the Queen's coronation, he was the first person after the bishops to pay homage to her. Philip knelt before his wife and pledged his loyalty.
Faith and truth I will bear unto you, live and die,
And so,
against all manner of
rising, touches the crown upon her head and kisses her upon the left cheek.
As a male consort to a female sovereign, Philip had no constitutional significance, yet no one was closer to the monarchy or of greater importance to the monarch than he was. By instinct he was a leader, yet Philip had always to take second place. By nature he spoke his mind, and that sometimes got him into trouble. Yet for decade after decade, his was the support that mattered most to the throne. Philip was born on the island of Corfu in June 1921. His family was part of European royalty. He was a prince of Greece, but his ancestors were largely Danish, German and Russian. His father, Prince Andrew, was banished from Greece when Philip was 1. With his mother, Princess Alice of Battenberg, Philip was rescued by a British warship sent by their second cousin, King George V. For Philip it was the start of a rootless childhood. His parents separated and he was passed between relatives in Britain and Germany. Eventually he settled at Gordonston School in northern Scotland. The emphasis there was on self-reliance and personal achievement, the principles which were to mould Philip's life. He'd finally found a degree of stability, as he later recalled.
At that time I was virtually stateless, I think. I had a Danish passport, but the Navy said that they'd accept me. And so I went into the Navy, I think certainly at the instigation of my uncle, Lord Mountbatten. But I think probably if left to my own devices, I probably would have joined the Air Force.
As the Second World War loomed, Philip was an 18-year-old Royal Navy cadet at the Naval College at Dartmouth.
His Majesty walking down the ranks of the cadets and afterwards taking the salute as the young officers-to-be marched past.
And when the King and Queen visited the college, they brought with them their 13-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth. According to witnesses, Philip showed off a great deal, but the meeting had made a deep impression on the princess. The romance developed slowly. During the war in which Philip served with distinction, the young naval officer wrote to Elizabeth and spent periods of leave at Windsor Castle. When the war ended, Philip started to escort Elizabeth to family gatherings. He changed his name to Philip Mountbatten and became a British citizen. The public realised there was a romance. Yet within Buckingham Palace, Philip was regarded with suspicion. One courtier wrote privately that he was rough, uneducated, and would probably not be faithful. But Elizabeth was deeply in love, and in the summer of 1947, the palace announced their engagement.
It is with the greatest pleasure that the King and Queen announced the betrothal of their dearly beloved daughter, the Princess Elizabeth, to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, R.N.
They were different in temperament. Elizabeth was by nature cautious, Philip impulsive. They had a shared ancestry. Philip, like Elizabeth, was a great-great-grandchild of Queen Victoria. They were, in fact, third cousins.
A sweep stands by just before the bridegroom enters his car.
Yet in many ways Philip was an outsider to the British establishment. The wedding, though, had caught the public's imagination.
Cheers of the people all along the route were sure evidence of his popularity.
On the 20th of November 1947, the newly created Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, stood within Westminster Abbey and exchanged marriage vows with the heir to the British throne.
I, Philip.
I, Philip.
Take thee, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary.
Take thee, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary.
To my wedded wife.
To my wedded wife.
Absent from the service were Philip's 3 sisters, all of whom had German husbands, one of whom had been a prominent Nazi. But in Britain's drab post-war years, the marriage was something to be celebrated.
Again and again the people called for Elizabeth and Philip. Again and again they joyfully responded.
A son, Charles, was born a year later, followed in 1950 by a daughter, Anne. By now Philip had resumed his naval career. He was posted to the Mediterranean island of Malta, where he was joined by his wife. It was the most carefree time of their married life, but it wasn't to last. In 1952, the couple set off on a tour of the Commonwealth. The King came with them to the airport. It was the last time they were to see King George VI, who, unknown to his daughter, was in the final stages of lung cancer.
It was a farewell. It was also, as events turned out, goodbye.
It was at a hunting lodge in Kenya that Philip told his wife of her father's death. Someone who was there said Philip looked as though half the world had dropped on him.
As George VI returns to his sorrowing capital,
They returned to London to lead the national mourning.
And now here is the Queen.
His wife was now Queen. Philip was there in support, but he was never given the title Prince Consort, and his role was undefined. He had ideas to update the monarchy, but the palace old guard resisted and the Queen sided with them. Philip became disillusioned. "I'm no more than an amoeba," he said. He channeled some of his restless energy into a boisterous social life. He and a group of male friends met every week in rooms above a restaurant in London's Soho. There were long convivial lunches, visits to nightclubs, and glamorous companions. By the 1960s, Philip's life was more settled. He and the Queen had 2 more children, Prince Andrew, born in 1960, and Prince Edward in 1964. And in family matters at least, Philip was in charge.
Prince Charles arrives with his father, the school's most famous old boy.
He insisted that his sons should go to his old school, Gordonston. Prince Charles in particular disliked the school's Spartan approach to life, but Philip was unsympathetic.
Is it the 18th we're due back now?
18th, I think so, yes.
By now, Philip had found his role. He busied himself by promoting issues in which he had a personal interest.
40 minutes to get round the world. Well, it's going to be a bit of a rush. It may leave you a little bit muddled, but...
Yet diplomacy seemed alien to him. He urged British industry to pull its finger out and complained on American television that the royal family didn't have enough money.
No question of just we get a lump sum and we can do what we like with it. The thing is that it's allocated for particular purposes. Now, inevitably, if nothing happens, we shall either have to, I don't know, we may have to move into smaller premises, who knows?
He ran into trouble on a visit to India when he shot a tiger, which seemed a curious thing to do given his pioneering interest in wildlife conservation. And years later, on a state visit to China with the Queen, he made what he thought was a private remark about slitty eyes. It was a diplomatic gaffe which dominated the headlines and added to his reputation for making misjudged remarks.
It's all right, isn't it?
Yet Philip had a sharp, inquiring mind and was determined to make a contribution of his own. The groundbreaking 60s film Royal Family was made in part at his instigation. He felt it was time for the family to show a more human face to the world.
The salad is ready.
Good.
And for many years he toured the globe as president of the then World Wildlife Fund, speaking out about the need to conserve nature.
We depend on being part of the web of life. We depend on every other living thing on this planet, just as much as they depend on us. Now, the choice before us is quite simple as well.
He promoted technology, helped underprivileged children, and had a lifelong interest in spiritual issues. But his most lasting creation was the scheme named after him, the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, which encouraged millions of young people in countries around the world to realise their potential.
To give young people a chance to discover their own abilities for themselves as an introduction to the responsibilities and interests of the grown-up world, and incidentally, to make new friends and have a great deal of fun and satisfaction in the process.
Believe it.
No decade was more difficult for the royal family than the 1990s. The death of Diana, Princess of Wales, was both a family tragedy and a moment of tension for the monarchy. It was the Queen to whom the country looked for public comfort. It was Philip to whom the Queen turned for private support.
And still Prince William, with his head hung, walking next to his grandfather.
It was Philip whose gentle encouragement had persuaded William and Harry to walk behind their mother's coffin to her funeral. And contrary to his sometimes insensitive image, it had been Philip who'd taken the lead in trying to understand the domestic problems of his children, prompted perhaps by his own memories of what it's like to marry into the royal family. That little-known, softer side to his personality emerged during the inquest into the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. Philip had had a good relationship with his daughter-in-law, yet, bizarrely, he'd found himself accused of her murder by Mohammed Al-Fayed. Buckingham Palace took the unusual step of issuing extracts from letters between Diana and her father-in-law. She'd referred to him as dearest Pa. In reply, he'd been affectionate and self-deprecating about his talents as a marriage counsellor. The Al-Fayed allegations were revealed to be absurd. Philip remained physically active at an age when most men would have relished retirement. He went carriage driving, and he was still carrying out more engagements than many younger members of the family. Some he did alone, such as this visit to British troops in Iraq.
How did you get into this?
But most he did with his wife. He was the figure a few paces behind the Queen, always looking out for her, and often guiding children through the barriers to present their flowers to her. By the time of his 90th birthday in June 2011, celebrated at his insistence with little fanfare, he'd accepted that it was time to slow down a little.
I reckon I've done my bit. I want to enjoy myself for a bit now. With less responsibility, less frantic rushing about, less preparation, less trying to think of something to say. On top of that, memory's going. I can't remember names and things. Yes, I'm just sort of winding down.
There was little immediate evidence, though, of any winding down. Despite a serious health scare at Christmas 2011, when he had to be taken to hospital with a blocked coronary artery, he remained at the Queen's side for most of her Diamond Jubilee programme, which took them the length and breadth of the country. It wasn't until 2017 that the Duke, then aged 96, carried out his final solo engagement. It was a parade for the Royal Marines on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. It was pouring with rain, but, as ever, duty took priority. He took his time meeting those on parade and taking the salute as the Marines marched past to bid him farewell. His life after that was much quieter, spent mostly at the Queen's estate at Sandringham. It was there in January 2019, while he was driving himself from the estate, that he survived a serious road accident. His vehicle overturned, he was badly shaken, and he surrendered his driving licence shortly afterwards. By now he was rarely seen in public. There were occasional appearances at family occasions such as weddings, yet he remained a supportive figure to the Queen and his family. Throughout his adult life, despite the formality of his position, Philip retained his own style of doing things. He made his own uncompromising mark on national life. He once summed up his approach in characteristically forthright fashion.
I've just done what I think is my best. I can't suddenly change my whole way of doing things. I can't change my interests. I can't change the way in which I react to things. It's part of, that's somebody's style, and it's too bad. You've got to lump it.
Throughout all the monarchy's many ups and downs since the Second World War, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, the longest-serving consort in British history, was the restless outsider who put his wife and duty first. In doing so, he fulfilled his coronation oath of allegiance to Elizabeth, his Queen. Their marriage and his support were the essential foundations which underpinned the success of her reign. In a speech to celebrate their golden wedding anniversary, the Queen spoke of the debt that she and the country owed him.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.